This past weekend, if you're friends with us on Facebook, Kelly and I had the distinct honor and privilege of returning for our third Caskey conference at the New Orleans Seminary, which is a conference they do every year it's just a time of refreshment and rejuvenation for pastors and pastors' spouses, basically. And it's a really good time. But for us in particular, the Caskey conference holds very special significance because it was at that conference 2 years ago that I first began to realize, I was first confronted face to face with the fact that God, and you've heard this story before, the fact that God was calling me to step out and do something more with my life and go into pastoral ministry. And up to that point, I had been sort of hiding from that call and putting it off and saying, basically 100 excuses why that wasn't a good idea. And it was at that conference that I was confronted with that fact. And it was at that conference I sat in a pew, not unlike one of these, and bowed my head and prayed before I got up and left that building. God, I'll tell you what, if this is what you're telling me to do, I'm in. I'm in. And about 9 days later, hello, this is Dr. Darrell Farrington. and all of a sudden, I'm in talks to come to this church. And it was just amazing how God orchestrated that event, that it was almost like he was just waiting for me to say, okay, I'm in, because I've got the church. We just need you to get on board. And so I'd like to think that us coming here and my family coming here has been good for the church. I'd like to think that. But I know for a fact that us coming here, this church has been great for our family. I mean that. We love you guys. And just to quote Paul, I thank my God every time I think of you. And so for a time such as this church came along at a pivotal time in our life when we desperately needed, I think, the opportunity that this church afforded. And here we are, and it's been a roller coaster ride in the best possible way. The downs are not like downs. The downs are the wee when we just went over the big hump. So it's been amazing, and the ministry just milestones have been flying, and I'm so I feel in a lot of ways like this. I'm going on 2 years now. I'm still telling people a year and a half because I guess it hasn't registered. I was telling people this weekend, year and a half. Kelly's like, no, it's been closer to 2. So 2 years now. I'm not the new pastor anymore. I'm just a pastor. And yet it still feels like I'm in the middle of a honeymoon. And I just want to say, by the way, Dolores, I hope and pray that 2 years into your marriage, it still feels like a honeymoon. Amen. So anyway, I thank you guys, and I love being here. I love all of you. And I'm just, 2 years down, hopefully 202 to go. That's how I feel. So anyway, thank you so much. And I couldn't even begin to count all the ways this church has been a blessing. So, and I mean that from the absolute bottom of my heart. So all of that being said, let's dive in to our final message in the Gospel of John. Today we reach the very, very end of it. Today's message, for all intents and purposes, is going to be a continuation of what we began last week. Just a continuation, and we're still looking at the same account. We're just digging in further. We're going further than we went last week. And I mentioned last week that John chapter 21, for all intents and purposes, functions more or less as an epilogue to the gospel as a whole. We see Jesus here at the very end kind of setting some things right that have gone askew and that he needs to fix and put those trains back on the rails, specifically getting some things right with the disciples. And in particular, Peter. Peter had a very specific problem or fallout that needs to be rectified because he's the one who just denied Jesus 3 times during the trial, not too long before. And it's also a passage that's all about restoration. Restoration, thank God for it. Let me repeat this from last week because this is going to factor big time into everything we talk about today. But it's because of the restoration that Jesus offers that we can always get back after any setback. We need to know this. We can always get back after any setback. So I've titled this final message from the Gospel of John, The Get Back After the setback. So last week, we looked at restored fellowship. I told you we had some aspects of restoration to get through. It was all about restored fellowship. And I said this week that we would look at restored faith and restored focus. But I'll be honest with you, I went back to the text this week and continued studying, and I've decided to add a fourth item to the list. So we can add this to restored fellowship, restored faith, and restored focus. Restored fascination. Restored fascination. And you'll see why in just a moment. So please flip with me to the Gospel of John, chapter 21. We are going to this morning be focusing on verses 15 through 25, but for the sake of context and making sure we all understand where we are and what's happening, I will be reading again from verse 1 just to keep that flow. But when I'm done, we're going to dive into verses 15 through 25. So if you would you please read with me from the Gospel of John, chapter 21. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? They answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. That was the joke from earlier. 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Now, where we're going to pick up from this morning, verse 15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, follow me. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, the one who also had leaned back against him during the supper and had said, Lord, who is it that is going to betray you? When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, Lord, what about this man? Jesus said to him, if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. So the saying spread abroad among the brothers that the disciple was not to die, yet Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die, but if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things. And we know that his testimony is true. Verse 25. Great verse. Now there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. We'll start this morning by breaking down. We're going to look at this in sections. We're going to break down verses 15 through 19 first. And it's in verses 15 through 19 where we see restored faith, specifically by Peter's reaffirming exchange. That's where we see this happen. You guys want to hear a sappy love story? Some sappy teenage puppy dog romance? I mean, we are having a bridal shower in just a little while. If there's ever been a day for a sappy love story, it should be today, right? Which, by the way, I hear I'm not invited to. All good, all good. If somebody would save me a chicken wing, I will pray an extra prayer of blessing upon your house and your household. I will, I promise. Okay, so when Kelly and I were dating, and we wanted to send each other a sappy little message in the days before, there was no way for me to text her or slide into the DMs or anything like that. In those days, teenager in the mid-90s, just wanting to do that. You didn't have that many options. So what I would do, I would write on paper a message, a letter, a sappy love letter. I'd spray it with some of my cologne. Polo Sport, if you're wondering. It was Polo, but then I evolved to Polo Sport. All my friends were into Cool Water, but I was a Polo Sport guy. And I would put that letter in the mail. And then there would come a point, sometime thereafter, when I would get a letter in the mail, and it smelled like her perfume. And I would open that letter, and I'd, get a big whiff, and it was as if she was right there. Because I smelled that perfume. It was as if she was right there. In fact, one time, she even sprayed some of her perfume on my favorite CD that I listened to all the time, so that I would smell it every time I got that CD out. And so, yeah. In case you're wondering, Bone Thugs and Harmony, East 1999, Eternal. Because, nothing says gangsta like bumping, see you at the crossroads, with perfume coming out of your CD player. Total gangsta. In my 1984 Bonneville. So, I would, the reason I'm bringing up the CD specifically is because I'd say sometime within the last year, I actually found my stash of old CDs from those years. And I'm sitting there going through them like, oh, I remember that one. I remember that one. I remember that one. It's a big old stack. And I'm going through them. Does everybody know what a CD is? Okay, for the younger people. A CD is a round little piece of plastic that you can store music on. It's kind of like a primitive form of Spotify. Okay. So we would, I'm going through the CDs, and I get to this one CD, and before I even knew what I was doing, before I even had a chance to ask why I'm doing this, I put this CD up to my face and sniffed it. And as soon as I did, I said, why in the world did I just do that? Like, it took me a minute. And then it hit me. It's like, wait a second. That's right. This is the CD she sprayed her perfume on all those years ago. The perfume had long since worn off. The CD didn't smell like anything, but it was in my motor memory to sniff that CD, and it just came out to do that. And it's funny how we get that kind of stuff ingrained in us. And so I'm sniffing this CD, and then I realize, and then all the memories come back. All the memories about all the things and all that kind of stuff, because I was like programmed to do that. And I just want to say, look, of all of our senses, I would say it's our sense of smell that we give the least attention to. We're primarily, we like to see things, we hear things, we give primacy to those senses, but like smell kind of, we don't really think about how significant the sense of smell is usually, and yet it's such a powerful sense. It can trigger very powerful emotions and memories. Like right now, as I'm speaking, you could probably close your eyes and think of some smell. Maybe it was like your aunt's house when you were a kid, or your grandma's house when you were a kid, the way it would smell when you would walk in the door. Maybe there's certain smells you can think of that'll just take you right back to a place and time in your memory and in your history, and you can be there like that with just a whiff of an aroma. Oh, just a whiff of an aroma. So I say all that to say, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but the smell of charcoal is a very particular and a very specific kind of smell, isn't it? You know that smell when you smell it. One of my very favorite aromas in the whole entire world is the smell of a charcoal grill. There doesn't even have to be food on it. It smells delicious. You know what I'm talking about? I've wondered more than once, can I eat one of those charcoals? Because they smell, when you smell that thing come on, that's my favorite smell, one of them. One of my least favorite, at least when it's in my backyard, because that means it's going down. One of my least favorite smells is when I smell charcoal grill in someone else's yard, because that means I can't have any, and that's sad. But it's a very specific and a very noticeable smell, but you can't miss it. Yeah, I can't miss it. So if you took me up on my little challenge last week and you went back and you reread John chapter 18 like I asked you to do, and you were looking for that phrase charcoal fire, then you'll recall that the charcoal fire Peter was standing over in John chapter 18, that was the site of where he denied Jesus. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. He denied so much as even knowing Jesus. I don't even know this man. Even though just moments before, just earlier that same night, he had boasted before Jesus, I will die for you, even if no one else will. Even if no one else will, I will lay down my life for you. Basically saying, in a sense, I love you more than any of these guys do. Even if none of them is willing to lay down their life for you, I'll do it. And by the way, in a second, when Jesus asks him, do you love me more than these? There's your connection point. He's basically saying, I'm all in. I love you more than anybody. I will lay down my life for you, only to turn around and say, I don't even know this man. While Jesus is actually on trial for his life. And this wouldn't have been that long ago, like I just said. We're talking just a few days, really, between the resurrection and now. And what does Peter find on that shore on the morning of this account when he gets out of that water, dripping? He finds another charcoal fire. That exact same smell. The last time he smelled that smell was when he was denying his Lord 3 times. And he gets out of that boat, I keep saying a boat, trying to say boat. He gets out of that water and he finds what? A charcoal fire. And standing next to that fire is none other than the guy that he just denied the last time he was standing over a fire like that. So all of this is happening at the same time. And you can't tell me he didn't make the connection. He didn't make the connection. Make no mistake, this is not arbitrary. This is not a random detail. This did not just happen to happen. This is very intentional on Jesus' part. It is not a coincidence. Jesus knew what he was doing. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but when Jesus was on trial and Peter was outside denying him, there's no human reason that Jesus should know what was going on outside. There's no human reason why Jesus would know that Peter was standing over a charcoal fire denying him. They never spoke. You understand that? Once Peter ran away, they never spoke again. Peter, for all intents and purposes, went into a hole and disappeared. We don't read anything about him during those intervening days. He has no reason to know that, and yet he knows. And when Peter gets out of that water and sees Jesus next to that charcoal fire, like, hey, does this look familiar? Does this smell familiar? Peter knew that Jesus knew. You see it? A lot's going on here. Peter knew that Jesus knew, but Jesus was not rubbing Peter's nose in what he did. He wasn't like rubbing his nose in it like, ha, you made a mistake. That's not what's going on here. Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. Jesus is setting the scene, the exact scene that transpired just a few nights sooner, and he's given Peter a chance to take it all back. He's recreating the scene of the denial and giving him a chance to take it back. And if you recall, a while back, throughout the series, I've been mentioning that how John plays with light and dark, and that we see all these contrasts between light and dark. Peter was standing over the charcoal fire at night denying Jesus, but now in the morning, in the early morning, he's going to be given a chance to reaffirm his love for Jesus. And that's what that's what Jesus is setting up here. And Jesus wants him to know, look, I know exactly what you did. I've set the scene exactly as it was, except now it's light, and I'm going to give you a chance to walk it back. He's welcoming him back, and that's what makes this so sweet, because it wasn't just arbitrary. He knew what he did, and he said, I'm going to welcome you back anyway. In fact, I'm going to recreate the scene of the crime, and we can run that back and do it a different way. Let's just run it back. He even says, do you love me more than these? And every commentary I read for this sermon, there's a bunch of different ways you could take that, but they all agree what Jesus meant was, do you love me more than these guys do? Because it was calling back to that boast that Peter would lay down his life for him, even if no one else did. And so what does he do? He asks him 3 times, do you love me? 3 times he made Peter say it. Do not miss the significance. Because, again, how many times did Peter deny Jesus? 3. Jesus is making Peter relive that night. He's giving him a chance to run it back, but it's in reverse. He's playing like that Uno reverse on him. He's letting him take it all back. He's showing him that we can always get back after any setback. That's what he's showing him here. But Peter's restoration isn't complete yet. He still has some things to learn. Still has some things to work out, because then Jesus delivers this prophecy in verse 18, if you saw that, talking about how his arms are going to be stretched out and all of this. This is a prophecy concerning Peter's eventual martyrdom. He's telling him in advance, he's alluding to the way he's going to eventually die, the way he's going to give his life for the Lord. Tradition, church tradition, if you're not aware of this, tells us that Peter was crucified upside down. He was going to be taken to be crucified. He did not want to be crucified the same way Jesus was. He didn't feel worthy, so they turned him upside down. That's what tradition tells us, and that's what Jesus is basically alluding here to, talking about his hands being stretched out, and he's going to be led to a place where he doesn't want to go. And John even tells us in the text that that's what Jesus was doing. But notice how the first thing Peter does upon Jesus suggesting that, as he turns around, he looks at John, who's coming up behind them, and he says, what about him? What about him? I know we were having this moment here, but what about him? What's going to happen to him? And this is what takes us into verses 20 through 24. And this is the second point today, where we see restored focus. We just saw the restored faith, but now we see restored focus. The problem is Peter's roaming eye. That's the problem. He's not focused. In Matthew chapter 20, Matthew chapter 20 is very relevant here. Jesus tells a parable. Depending on your translation of the Bible, it's either called like the parable of the workers in the vineyard or the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. But Jesus tells this parable. And in the parable, there's a landowner who basically represents God. Jesus even says the kingdom of heaven is like, and he goes into this parable. So this landowner, he goes out in the morning to hire some guys to come work his land. And he finds some guys and he says, hey, I'll pay you a denarius to come work for me for today. A denarius was which would pay somebody for a day's work back then. So they're like, sure, yeah, we'll do that. So he takes them and they go work in his land. But then a few hours go by and the landowner goes out a second time and he sees some other guys standing around doing nothing. He's like, hey, why don't you come work for me? Sure. So they go work for him. But then a few hours later, he does it again. And then a few hours later, he does it again. This goes on all day. By the end of the day, the last group of guys he hires to come work his property, they only end up working 1 hour before it's quitting time, before it's time to go clock out and head home. So they only work 1 hour. And then the master comes to settle accounts with everybody, and he starts with the guys he hired first, and he gives them their denarius. Ding, 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 ding. That's the sound it makes. And then he starts handing out the wages to the other guys, and he gives them the same amount of money. And as you can imagine, the guys that were there first, they get a little indignant about this. They get a little mad. They're like, why did you pay him the same as us? Why did you give them the same as you paid us? We worked all day. They only worked 1 hour. To which the master very matter-of-factly tells them, friends, what are you mad about? I paid you exactly what you agreed to when you agreed to come work for me. I paid you a fair wage, and it's a fair wage that you agreed to. I haven't wronged you in any way. I can pay them whatever I want. It's my money. Don't I have the right to do with my money what I want to do? The business arrangements I make with them are really none of your concern, is it? You got what you agreed to. Now, some of us in here might be tempted to agree with the guys that were complaining. You might be tempted to do that. Just know if you do, you're pitting yourself against Jesus, first of all. But the fact is they got what they agreed on. And quite frankly, it was none of their business what business arrangement he went and made with other people later. They got exactly what they agreed to do. And the message of the parable is pretty clear. Worry about yourself. Worry about yourself. Don't worry about how the master chooses to bless the guy down the street or the guy down in the next yard. Don't worry about how he's blessing them. Be grateful for how he's blessing you. Don't sit around like, oh, if only God did this for me, like he did that for that. Why don't I have this gift? Why don't I have that gift? Why did God give this to that person and not me? I want that. That's called, it's called a lot of things. Envy, coveting, which I believe is against one of the commandments or two of the commandments. But there's a lot wrong with that. But that's the idea here, right? God has blessed you. Don't worry about how he's blessing the other person. He can show them as much grace as he wants. But look at Peter here. Jesus has just restored his fellowship. He's just restored his faith. Now he needs to restore his focus. Because Peter's got this wandering eye. Jesus is trying to do a thing. And Peter's like, well, what about him? Like, no. Peter, don't worry about John. Peter needs to be worried about Peter. Peter's got a lot to learn. This aimlessness, this listlessness, this lack of focus and lack of attention and lack of purpose that he has been exhibiting ever since the arrest, when he fell away like a scattered sheep and ran, this complete lack of focus. Jesus says, enough's enough, man. Get back to work. Get back to work. Isn't that what he tells them? Like, don't worry about him. You follow me. Don't look at him. What did Jesus just say in verses 15 through 19? Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Do the job I gave you, is what he's telling him. Get to work. I mean, yeah, it's great. Peter just reaffirmed his love for Jesus 3 times. Don't get me wrong. That's a really, really good thing. But Jesus did not let him stop there. Yeah, you can tell me you love me all day long. Great, we're not going to stop there. He told him basically, don't just say you love me. Do the things. Show me you love me by doing the things. Show me you love me by doing the things that come along with that love. That's what he's telling him there. Get back to what I called you to do. Peter, you are not a fisherman anymore. You're a shepherd now. What did he say? Tend my sheep, feed my fish, all that. You're not a fisherman anymore, Peter. You're a shepherd. Why are you catching fish or trying to catch fish? You can't seem to do that too good either. Why are you trying to catch fish? Tend the sheep. We're not doing fish anymore. We're doing sheep. We're not worried about fish anymore. We're worried about sheep. That's what he's telling him here. Yes, reaffirm your love for me, but then get back to work. Get to the job. Listen, I make no apology for what I'm about to say. Just going to lob it out there, and it is what it is. But Jesus has no use whatsoever for people who say they love him or people who say they follow him, but then don't do any of the things that go along with that. None. Jesus is more known in the Gospels, and you can take this challenge and go read it. You can go read them, and he is more known for turning people away than he is for trying to drag them along. Jesus was not putting on ice cream socials to try to get the neighborhood people to come in. Jesus would look around and see that the crowd. Jesus was not putting on ice cream socials. I love ice cream. Chocolate chip cookie dough is boss. Jesus was not going chasing after people saying, please come to my church, please come to my church. No, Jesus would turn around, read it, feel free. He would turn around, see that the crowd got too big, and he would up the ante, and then a third of them to a half of them would walk away. That's what Jesus did. Jesus was more known for turning people away because his bar was so high. His bar was so high, and not a lot of people could handle that. So he has no time. He has no use for people. And that's not to make him sound hateful or spiteful. I'm just saying he has no use for people who say they follow him but don't do any of the things that go along with that. That's all I am saying about that. He has called each of us, and he has tasked each of us to serve him in very specific and very concrete ways. And part of our mission as Christ followers is to discover what those ways are and then do those. And I'm sorry, but being a nice person and just trying to help people, that doesn't mean it. That's so generic, and it's so much more than that. Like, no, we have specific assignments he wants from us. And part of our task is to learn what those are and then to do them. And that's why, like we did the Purpose-Driven Life study, that's why we did that. In part, was to help you discover what your purpose is and what he's tasked you to do. But and that's why so much of, just even the way I like to teach and enforce this emphasize this is to help us understand that. Because we have marching orders. And he has these jobs for us. And if we're not doing that, then all we're doing is just going through life collecting empty nets. The empty net that they hauled up over and over and over, that's all we're doing is we're going around collecting empty nets. And listen, you could maybe you could just kind of slide on in to heaven doing the bare minimum. You probably could. But you're going to look really silly when you get there hauling this empty net behind you. I'm telling you. Don't forget the disciples are going to be there. And they're going to be like, we know what that's like. Just saying. I'm not saying they're catty, but, you're going to look pretty silly dragging that in. And then we come to what may be one of the biggest understatements in the entire New Testament, which is verse 25. Verse 25, which is what I'm using to argue that what we need is restored fascination. And the way that we see this here is we see it by the powerful rhetoric employed. John employs some very powerful rhetoric here. And if there's any confusion about what I mean by rhetoric, just listen to anybody talk about politics. That's all you hear is rhetoric. Rhetoric, here's a definition for you. It is a persuasive statement or statements attempting to influence the one who receives it. That's what it is. It's just you're trying to make a forceful statement to influence the person who hears it. And that's what we get in verse 25. It's rhetoric. It happens to be true, but it's powerful rhetoric that John is employing here. He says in verse 25, now there are also many other things that Jesus did, and were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Now, I suppose we could squabble about how literally he meant that to be taken. We could, but hopefully we get the point. Hopefully the point is not lost on us. Clearly we don't know every little thing Jesus ever said or did. Clearly we don't. You know, we don't know what his favorite food was. We don't know what his favorite color was. We don't know if he went around quoting movies that weren't made yet. Like Peter, does something Peter, and Jesus is like quoting Napoleon Dynamite. He's like, gosh! Peter's like, what was that? Oh, it's a movie. Don't worry about it. What's a movie? Don't worry about it, man. Do I have to tell that parable again? Like, worry about yourself. We don't know. There's things about Jesus we do not know and won't know in this life. Clearly, there were some amazing teachings. Clearly, there were amazing stories. There's probably a bunch of miracles that we don't even know about. Because they're just not recorded here. And for the record, while I'm on the topic, because I think we wish we knew more about Jesus sometimes, there's a whole market of false gospels that purport to give us more information about Jesus. A whole market. Let me just reaffirm, in case there's any doubt whatsoever. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, those are the four gospels. Anything else is a forgery or a fake. Okay? Anything else. Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Judas, you name it. Those are forgeries and fakes that we don't have time to get into all their backgrounds right now. There are four true canonical gospels, and that's why those are the ones that are in our Bible, is because those are the true ones. But clearly, we don't know everything about him that there was to know. And there's just all of this information that would be great to have. It really would be. When I was a little kid, I used to fantasize / daydream about becoming an archaeologist. I thought that was going to be my calling in life. I so badly wanted to get up in one of those pyramids and see what was in there. That just seemed so fascinating to me before I understood that they probably just spent 99% of their time digging in dirt. But I, Indiana Jones, I just the thought of these adventures, I'm gonna go explore and discover, these ruins of this temple and all of this. I used to have all these thoughts. That kind of thing was so fascinating to me, and even to this day, I still think about some of these civilizations that have come and gone. Great civilizations that have come and gone, and what they were like in their heyday. I wonder sometimes, is there an Atlantis somewhere in the bottom of a sea somewhere? Who knows? I've heard some interesting stories that suggest, I guess, there is. But there's all these civilizations. There's treasures that have been lost to time. Beautiful treasures, amazing treasures that have been lost to time. For example, if you're familiar with Sophocles, he was a Greek. He wrote plays and stuff like that. He was just one of the greats. I remember reading some of his stuff in English class, like Oedipus Rex and Antigone and stuff like that. I don't know if anybody did that, but maybe you've at least heard the name. But he's believed to have written at least 120 plays during his life, upwards of 130. You know how many we have today? Seven. The other ones do not exist. We have no idea. We have no idea about them. We just know that they existed at one point. Aristotle, for as famous as he is, the Greek philosopher, he's very pivotal in philosophy. We have almost nothing that he wrote. We have some lecture notes that he left behind, but all of the stuff that he published, like his books and stuff like that, we don't have those. We don't have those. Everything we know about him is from the lecture notes and from things other people have said about him. We don't have this. We don't have this information. But you know who probably did? The ancient library in Alexandria, if you ever heard of that. The ancient library, one of the most famous, it was probably the most famous ancient library from Egypt, from long, long, long ago, probably held all of those in there. In its collection of at least, get this, 400,000 scrolls. Massive library. It too was destroyed thousands of years ago, and it's gone. And who knows what we lost when that library got destroyed? Who even knows the mathematical and the scientific and just the plays and all of that stuff. Who even knows? All this knowledge, all this literature that's just gone. It doesn't exist anymore. But man, to think about all the things that Jesus said and did that we don't have access to, wow, what a treasure that would be. What an absolute treasure that would be. But I also think, before we get to worrying too much about that, we need to be more worried about the stuff that they did record and pass down to us, right? Because I could sit here and I would and bellyache about the stuff we don't have, but the question is, how are we measuring up to what we do have? How are we following this? How are we measuring up to this? Are we doing our part to follow this? Don't go around saying, man, if only we knew more about Jesus, if you're not being true to what we do know about Jesus. So we got to be careful with that too. And yet, I think verse 25 here is intended really just to kindle our fascination with this man. John, the guy writing this gospel, he refers to himself often as the disciple whom Jesus loved. This is a guy who was clearly enamored with Jesus. This is a guy who was clearly fascinated by Jesus, and he wants us to be fascinated by Jesus as well. And this statement just rings with that. He's letting us know, like, there's so much more to Jesus. There's so much more that we couldn't even record for you because it was just too much. I need you to know there was so much more to this man. There was so much more. We couldn't get it all down. You know, he wants to kindle our fascination with him. He wants to kindle the wonder in us. He wants to remind us that there was and there is so much more to this man. So much more to this man than we could ever even know. And yet what we do know is still more than sufficient. What we do know is still more than sufficient to change our lives. It is still more than sufficient to change our eternal destinies. From the road to hell to the road to God's kingdom. It's more than sufficient to do that. This man, this Jesus, who was God in the flesh, who John earlier in this very gospel said the word became flesh and dwelt among us. This man who left his heavenly throne, as we sang about this morning, and came here to wear our sin and shame. And then nail it to a cross so that it would die? This man, all so that we could experience true and eternal life? This man who took 12 ordinary guys with no special training, no special education, they didn't go to seminary. We had a sermon in this series called Did Jesus Go to Seminary? The answer was no. They had no special training experience. They were just dudes. Dudes you could have went and got at the market. He just walked, I'm not saying he picked them randomly, but when he picked them, most of them were just on a fishing boat. He said, come follow me. He took these 12 guys under his wing and used them to turn the world upside down. A bunch of fishermen, a tax collector, a politician guy, a guy that hated politicians. Just turn the world completely upside down with him. And even when they failed him, this man who lovingly restored them and taught them that you can always get back after any setback. This man, this Jesus that we have been reading about now for 50 sermons. Today is our 50th and final sermon in this Gospel of John series. And as we reflect on this account, and as we reflect on this entire gospel as a whole, let me also say, there have been times in my life when I felt a lot like Peter did in this text. Aimless, dejected in spirit, listless, wondering, was that it? Is there? Am I still going to be useful in the future to Jesus? Like, is it over for me? Have I outlived my usefulness? Is there anything else I can do? Is there anything else I can offer? I can't imagine that there is, but is there anything else for me? Usually in times of guilt over some kind of failure, but also in times of extreme hurt when I thought it was just over. But I love knowing that my importance and my usefulness to Jesus was never based on any particular talent or any particular skill that I have. It was never based on that, or even what I could provide. It never, ever was. I didn't have to get out and go catch a bunch of fish and bring them back to impress Jesus. I didn't have to do that. I just had to be teachable, willing to follow, willing to obey, and then to cast my net when and where he told me to cast it. And just about 2 years ago, he told me to cast that net here at Gretna Covenant Church. I'd say that worked out okay. That's what it was about. That's what it's about. And when I did that, he provided the fish. He provided the fish. And when you understand this about yourself, when you really understand this about yourself, you don't have to sit around wondering if your service really matters, or if you're going to be useful to the kingdom, or if there's anything you have to offer. You don't have to worry about those things because you understand you're not the one filling the nets. You're not the one filling the net. And after everything we've just read, after everything we've just walked through in this account, not just today, but in this whole gospel, this is where John chooses to end it. Here. He could have ended it in 20. 20 was a great place to end it. He said, no, I got one more chapter in me. And he wrote this account of Jesus showing the disciples, restoring the disciples, and then proving to them that they can always get back after any setback. That's where he chose to end this. But here's the thing, though. His grace and his restoration, they're not ends in themselves. That's the other thing he wanted us to see here. He's not just restoring us for the fun of it, although I think he does have fun restoring wayward sheep, but he's not just doing it for the fun of it. They're not ends in themselves. They're means to an end, so that we can get back to the mission that he called us to do. He restores us and then says, go tend my sheep. Go feed my lambs. Go get back to work. I will restore you 100,000 times, but get back to work after I do. That's where John ends this gospel today, and that's where I'm going to end this message. Cast the nets when and where he says. Know that he will restore you 1,000,000 times if he has to. There's always a get back after any setback. But get back to work. Can I get 2 amens? Amen. All right, that was more than 2, but I'll take it. Let's pray.